you have you seen any result linked to your research?
Any what?
Result.
Results?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the outcomes, for example, that my research is starting to kind of produce is the conversation that we have this federal law called IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that mandates that all states provide transition services at age 16. Now that my results are showing that putting it down to 14 produces better outcomes, everybody is starting to sit up and kind of take notice. And they're saying, well, let's look at changing this. And it's Republicans and Democrats both are saying the same thing. They won't admit to each other when they talk to each other. But when they call me, they're all like, okay, now what about 12? What about 10? Why is 14 good? And I'd say, well, we don't know about lower ages. All we know is 14 to 16. So there are some changes in laws that I think are at least being discussed. They haven't happened yet. But there's also some funding that they'll call me up and say, we have this amount of money. Should we give it to this program or this program? And if we give it to this program, what's going to happen? What are the outcomes? So given all the data that I have on the United States, and again, 6 million people, I produced a graph that said, okay, you know, $10 million funded to kids with learning disabilities versus or ADHD or all these different disabilities. This is the percent that will become employed. This is how many people that will pay taxes. This is the average of taxes, and I can produce an outcome of what would happen. And they're like, how did you get this? Well, this is the data that you guys give me. And they don't realize that this is there. So I think that they're more willing to listen, and I think that's the biggest, most important outcome, is that they're now coming to researchers first, and then acting. So many times politicians, they vote for stuff, or they create new laws, and they don't think about, well, does this make any sense? They don't have any data to support it, and they don't collect data to support things. So that's another thing. I'm working with the governor of Ohio who wants to increase the rate of reimbursement for supported employment. He wants to double it to make sure that it's financially, so that adult service agencies will be more wanting to go into supported employment rather than sheltered workshop. Because right now, sheltered workshops, you get more money by putting a child in sheltered workshop than supported employment. So he wants to double the amount of money that agencies get for supported employment. But he wants to do it conditionally by finding out whether that makes a difference. So I'm going to be collecting data for him for the next few years to see whether or not increasing the money actually increases the outcomes. You know, because we don't necessarily, it sounds like it would, but we don't know. So I think that building those relationships is also very important as well. That's probably one of my happiest professional moments is having a politician call me up and actually, I read this article, how can we make this happen in my state, that kind of thing.
And the goal for Sweden is to get more people to do that as well, from Swedish politicians' kind of point of view, because the disability policy in Sweden is not that much affected about in research. It's more the feeling that we want to do good and that we want to help people. That's very good in itself, but you can't stop there. You have to have research-based facts, what works and what doesn't work. Yeah. So it's very important, and that's one reason it's so good that you're here in Sweden now. Now you will have Swedish politicians maybe calling you and asking what to do.
As I told you, I've been working about 30 years with persons with intellectual disability. In Sweden, we have quite of trends coming and going. Right now, it's a lot of work trend for being at work. Most of us that's here today work with day activity. It's money coming from the municipal. Do you see any risk that this is a trend and we're talking about this is more economic effective, about quality of life dimension? Because when politician hears about that something is economic good, it often happens, but we know also that who's working with support employment, if people want to work, this is a good way to help them. But trends is also trends.
Well, and I think that's true too. In the United States, everything is it goes back and forth. So we have a Democratic president and things swing one way, and everything gets kind of, there's a trend that they create, and then depending on what happens tomorrow, we'll see who becomes president of the United States. It'll go another way, and it goes back and forth. And there are trends, I think, that people often fall back on. But one of the important things in the United States right now is the recession. And that's a trend that I think is almost overpowering all the stuff that we've done in the past in terms of shelter workshops. I think that there's a larger economic notion now that we have to start using money wisely. And that's one of the positives of the recession that we have in the country, because now we're watching, how are we spending our money? Are we spending it, should we spend a shelter workshop? Should we spend it on supporting employment? And then the day programs are another issue altogether. And those, in the United States, nobody is saying that that produces a good outcome, because that doesn't have a vocational component to it in the United States. But a lot of the trend that's kind of happening now is that we're changing adult day programs into vocational programs, at least by word, not necessarily by deed. And one of the things that the United States Senate wants to do is to see whether or not, they want to see what's happening in adult service programs. They want to see whether the services that they're funding are actually beneficial, because nobody knows in the United States. In the United States, the funding and the outcomes achieved in adult day programming, it's not regulated. There's no database like I have, and they want to change that. They want to see what happens when you go into a shelter workshop, when you go into a day program, what kind of outcome is being achieved, at what cost, and we don't know. And I think that's going to be the next big thing in the United States. Economic accountability, you ought to say. Economic accountability. What are we doing for the money you're getting?
In Sweden, we can see large differences between municipalities and regions of Sweden, where in some regions it's very easy to get help from the government, and you're getting good help and good matching, but on other places it's much harder, and also it might not even be possible to get a provider with supported employment in that particular municipality, while in other region is much easier. Do you see those differences in the United States as well?
Absolutely, and that's kind of one of the problems. In the 80s and 90s, a whole bunch of researchers did what I do now. They will look at support employment in their state. Some of you might know Paul Wayman in Virginia, some of you might know Frank Rush in Illinois, and they came out with studies that found different results for support employment. Paul Wayman found that it was very cost effective. Frank Rush said it wasn't. And we're always, well, why is there a difference? And one of the things that I've realized or found from my research is that there's differences across the United States in outcomes and costs and other types of things throughout all of the states, but also within states. For example, I did an evaluation for a state that doesn't want me to name it, because they found that supported employment wasn't very good in some parts of their state. Like in one town, their agencies might return $2 for every dollar of cost. So they're really very effective, very efficient. And then right next door in another town is another agency that returns 14 cents. And the question is why? And the problem is the people in the 14-cent agencies don't want to tell you. So they don't want me to go in and find out what they're doing or how they're doing so. So that is becoming one of the hot button questions that I'm trying to research. What makes a good agency? What makes them effective? What makes a good job coach? You know, what kinds of trainings do we need to provide to you to make you effective? And that's what we're trying to figure out. What makes you so good? And how do we make that, how do we pass that along? When I was a job coach, I felt my way. It was like walking through the darkness, trying to find what I was doing. I work with kids with autism, not realizing that I probably shouldn't pat them on the back and say, good job, really loudly, because then they get all upset. And, you know, I had to learn that in very painful ways, that you don't yell, good job, in the ear of a kid with autism, you know. So how do we take all the stuff that we've learned and disseminate it so we can find out that, oh, this agency is doing something really unique. No one's done research on it before, nobody knows about it. How do we find out about that information? And that's where I like coming to Sweden, because maybe you're doing something great too, and you can bring that to the United States. I think that we think that the information comes from researchers, and we give it to you, and that's not the case. I take it from you, and I write an article, and then it makes it look like I came up with the idea. Okay? Innovation, creative strategies come from the people that actually work with people with disabilities. I try to find those strategies. I try to find evidence for them, and I try to show them to other people. So the unique things that you all do, they may spread around the world and help even more people than you realize. The little notions that you come up with might help far more individuals with disabilities than you think. And that's kind of what I'm doing now with my research, trying to find out what makes a good job coach. How can we make you even better? How can we make adult service programs more efficient and more effective?